Hello, I'm Gary Quinn, and welcome to another episode of Ready, Set, Live. Instead of looking for what you don't have, acknowledge the power of gratitude. Gratitude is love in action. It paves the path to inner peace. My guest today is all about inner peace, Peter Coyote. He's an award-winning actor, author, director, screenwriter, and a two-time Emmy winner for his narration in the PBS series The Pacific Century and the Roosevelts. He is also an ordained Zen Buddhist priest with his new book titled The Lone Ranger and Tonto Meet Buddha. Stay close. I'll be right back. Welcome, Peter Coyote. How are you?
I am ragged, but all right, Gary. Thank you so
Excellent,
much.
Peter. People don't know how much you've worked in the entertainment world. I mean, your body of work is enormous, and you've worked for Barry Levinson, Roman Polanski, Steven Spielberg, Walter Hill, all the greats. And you've made over 150 films. When you look back at that body of work, does it sometimes astound you that you did so many things and you continue to do so many things?
Well, it does astound me. I mean, the crazy part of it is that I've always been a writer, and I never wanted to write for money. So when I came out of the 60s and the counterculture and addiction and single father, I was flat broke. My dad had lost all his money. And at a certain point, I was working for Governor Jerry Brown, and I had a big success there. And I thought, wow, I think I've left the counterculture behind. I'm going to try the big board, Hollywood, and see if I can go back to being an actor and make some money. And that was about the limit of my aspiration. But I was 39 when I got my Screen Actors Guild card. So that gives you a really short shelf life, because I don't care what star they are. Once they're over 50, they're appearing with tomorrow's teenage star in the same movie. So I had a really great run. And the fact that I could start at 40, living in San Francisco, and do 160 movies and travel the world and buy 2 houses for 2 wives and put 2 kids through school debt free, through graduate school debt free, I'm extremely grateful for that. But as soon as my kids were out of school, I was happy to let acting go. I didn't really like the life. I didn't like being a celebrity. And once I was over, 55 or 60, the roles were not so interesting anymore.
Yeah, yeah. What was the catalyst, Peter, that, let's say, turned you into connecting to Buddhism? How did you get exposed, or what was the catalyst that propelled that?
Well, I grew up in a very political family when I was a kid. At least my mother's people were political, and my dad was a very successful capitalist. But he was a civil libertarian, and he was very, very enamored of the Bill of Rights as a distinguishing document in our political system. And so I grew up around like the Urban League and oh God, I'm blanking out, like the civil liberties groups, and a lot of activity like that. And I began reading the Beats when I was about 14 years old. And here were adults, that were critical of the culture, critical of materialism, critical of selfishness. And they were not just angsty 14-year-old like myself. And they all began to mention Buddhism. So I started reading about Buddhism. And of course, I had no idea what it was, but I grabbed onto the Enlightenment idea as a superpower that would make me slim down, be unafraid of girls, have a response to every class bully. And I kind of went on that way, reading and thinking about it intellectually, until by the end of the counterculture and, 8 years of heroin use and 1,000 LSD trips, I realized I needed some ballast in my life. And I had the good fortune to meet Gary Snyder, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning poet, but also a real Zen guy. I mean, he'd lived in Japan for 9 years, lived in a Zen monastery, married a Japanese woman, wrote and spoke Japanese. And I thought if anyone was going to show me what a Zen life looked like, it would be him. And I became friends with him. And he very much, I think of him as my first teacher, even though we had no formal relationship other than a friendship. And basically, what I came to see was that the problem with everything was that people were in it. Mm-hmm. Didn't matter how great the ideas were, didn't matter how noble the truths were. If people were not disciplined, if they were not kind and compassionate, if they were not helpful to one another, nothing would work. And if they were, anything could work. You could have communism if people were kind and compassionate and helpful. And capitalism without regulation and without kindness is pretty beastly. So I began to practice and I began to work on those elements of myself, which, like all other humans, I have greed, I have anger, I have envy, I have delusion. And if we're not working on them, they're taking advantage of us or they're leaking out. And so I started just looking for some kind of inner peace, which is kind of illusory. I think a lot of people make that mistake, but it gets you to practice. And then it just deepened until it became my life.
And I think sometimes, Peter, people think Buddhism is a religion, but really it's about Buddhism envisions peace as an inner state of mental tranquility. And I know you said in one of your quotes, or you speak about finding oneself by losing oneself. And I think that brings us all back to that inner peace. For people who don't know what Buddhism is, what is Buddhism?
Okay. So I think inner peace is misleading.
Okay.
So let me tell you what the Buddha said.
Mm-hmm.
After his enlightenment, the Buddha came back and he had 4 noble truths. And if you just think about a noble truth, the word true means, first of all, real. And noble means worthy of respect. And this is what he said. The first was called dukkha. And he defined it as life, death, illness, uncertainty, trying to keep pleasant experiences next to you, trying to push away unpleasant experiences. It's been translated as suffering, but a better word is affliction. And this is something you can't help. It just comes at you. If you're in this world, there's like a wind blowing pepper at you. So he calls it a noble truth. And a noble truth means you don't have to be ashamed of it. You don't have to be guilty about it. It's not evidence of a lack of spiritual development. So the second noble truth is called samudaya, and it means arising. So it means when you're afflicted, stuff comes up. A guy cuts you off in a car, you want to shoot him the finger. Somebody cuts ahead of you in line. You see somebody hurting something else. Something comes up. You can't do anything about that either. It's a noble truth. And the Buddha treated both those things as energy. They're what moves life. So the third noble truth is where you can actually intervene. And that's called Nirodha. And the image of that is a clay wall that villagers would build around a fire to stop the fire from escaping and burning down the village. So what Buddha is saying is that you can contain the fire of affliction. You can contain the fire of arising. And by meditating and understanding the interdependence of all things, you can see they're essentially empty. And you can channel that energy just like putting gasoline in a motor. If you throw gasoline on the ground, it's just going to burn and start a conflagration. If you put it in a motor, it can do work. And what that work is the fourth noble truth called the Eightfold Path, where you ask yourself, right speech, right livelihood, right occupation, right energy, and you're the arbiter. You're modeling Buddha's life. So that's what it is. It's how to live a life of dignity and helpfulness. And most people, when they run from dukkha, when they run from affliction and arising, they make a lot more dukkha. They have illicit affairs. They become gamblers. They become shoppers. They become compulsive storytellers, or they amass wealth and power. The Buddha told you didn't have to do any of that. What you had to learn how to do was be dignified in the face of affliction, to contain it, to understand that it's essentially transitory, and then to translate your life into the Eightfold Path, which is a helpful, noble, dignified life to help others. That's basically it in a nutshell.
And I think, Peter, people are unhappy because they are always looking for something to fix them, instead of looking back in their own authentic well and really just being, like you said, they're shopping, they're having affairs, they're doing this, they're doing that. And I think there's an emptiness that they have, even though they are trying to fill the void. And is that in alignment with, I believe it's called Shunnata? Shunnata?
Well, Shunnata means it's a kind of peace that comes from sitting, but there's a specific to it. I mean, what you say is correct, but really what afflicts people is not the mind, it's their attachment to the mind. Mm-hmm. The mind is just a gland that produces images. But when we believe everything we think, when we get locked into our internal dramas, when we get locked into our narratives, that's what jerks us left and right and makes us suffer. So when we meditate, we learn to hold the body still. We learn to put our attention on our breathing, and we just let the mind be the mind. And when we're not attached to it, we can watch it in the same way that we watch a movie. We go to a movie and we watch these projections on a screen, and because we know they're projections, we can watch horrible, crazy, funny, laughable, silly things without really being attached. Well, there's a screen in your mind, which is your awareness, and the things that come up, the arisings, you can watch, and you can decide when you're going to let the clutch out and engage with it and when you're not. But if you decide not to disengage and you've learned the techniques of meditating, the mind just takes care of itself and you're not attached to it. And that's where the inner peace comes from. It's not like the mind itself ever stops. Death will take care of that one.
Exactly.
It's that you learn how to attach or how to disengage.
And I think a lot of people have an issue trying to meditate. I've been meditating for many years, but when I teach around the world and I speak at events, people always say, I have trouble meditating. I fall asleep, or I can't keep my mind in one place. Any tips for someone who says, Peter, I'd love to meditate as a teacher, and you were ordained in 2011 as a Zen Buddhist priest? What would you say to someone who said, Peter, I love this, but show me what do I do just to meditate?
Sure. Thanks for asking that question. The first chapter in my new book, not the one we're talking about, but one which is still being edited, is called You Think You Can't Meditate, But You Can. So there's 3 parts to meditating. The first one is posture. You either sit in the chair, you sit cross-legged with a pillow under your butt so you can sit up straight, and you put your hands in this mudra. I'm going to show you what it is.
Okay, cool.
This is it. If you're left-handed, your right hand goes on top. Mm-hmm. If you're right-handed, your left hand goes on top. And that sits in your lap. That's your attention gauge. Mm-hmm. And when that circle collapses, your attention has collapsed. So you relax your stomach. You put your eyes open 45 degrees in front of you. And you just let your breath be breathed, and you pay attention to each exhale like it was a little baby you were sending out into the world, really tenderly. And when your mind starts to bother you, you just put your attention on your posture and that mudra and your breathing. It's a mistake to think that you're not supposed to have thoughts. What meditating will teach you to do is watch where thoughts come from and how they disappear into emptiness, and that they don't have to move you around or push you around. And by doing this every day and practicing, I've been doing it 50 years now, you develop a confidence. Meditation is as much for the body as it is for the mind. You're not trying to move your mind into some cotton candy heaven of the poor or jump a fence and be in another reality we call enlightenment. What you're trying to do is be in this life and not be bothered by the winds of dukkha, the affliction, and what arises. And it's in this life that you'll have peace. And what nirvana is the understanding that in the next minute, you can make a brand new choice you've never made before. That there is no little doll of Gary Quinn inside you or no Peter Coyote. It's just awareness. And all the things we think when we say, oh, that's always me, I've always been that way, those are just habits. And once you start to understand that, you can take a step outside your personality. And when you meditate, very often you'll slip out the bottom of your personality or off to one side, and then you're out of the world of contradictions. Because the personality can only has three choices. You can like something, you can dislike it, or you can be neutral. And once you get beyond that, then you're in the world where everything is contained, where you have infinite choices. And that's our birthright. And that sense of freedom you can develop by this simple act of meditating. Meditate 25 minutes every day, once or twice a day. And in a month, you'll start to feel like you're in a much more spacious interior. It's not like your problems are going to disappear, but the mind will slow down on its own. You can't slow it down. It'll just, when you sit still, you're denying impulses to the brain. You're denying input, and it gradually starts to relax. And then you can kind of see things as they actually are, rather than through the prism of your personality.
Brilliantly said. I can't wait for that new book. And your latest book is the new book called The Lone Ranger and Tonto Meet Buddha. That is a great title. I know this book is about really showing the masks of how we can basically put on the masks and release them or change them. And you teach this. Tell us what the book is about in a nutshell, because I think this is a book that people should really read.
Sure. Well, for about 35 years, I've been teaching these classes where I use acting exercises and improvs to kind of stress people into bumping into the borders of themselves, their understanding of themselves. If I change your posture, it's going to bring up different feelings. If I make you behave differently, it's going to bring up different feelings that are going to be not you. So I soften you up that way with a lot of exercises. They're fun and they're goofy, but they actually push you. And after about half a morning, I'll put a mask on you, a neutral mask, and I'll hold a mirror in front of you. And when you look in that mask, something will click and you'll see a personality. You'll know it holistically. You'll know everything about it. And with the disappearance of your everyday personality goes your shyness, your self-consciousness, your second guessing, your self-criticism. And for about 5 or 10 minutes, you have an experience, cold sober, of complete inner freedom. And in these classes, I'll make everybody do this 3 times with 3 different masks. They'll find 3 different characters and they interact with each other. People goof around. We do scenes together. And I use that as a lost leader. I call it enlightenment light, and say, I've just shown you cold sober that your personality is not a fixed thing, that there are infinite realities inside you. So if you want to reclaim this or recapture this without a drug or without a mask, you need to learn how to meditate, and you need to understand a Buddhist description of reality. So there's a lot of explanation in the book. So I thought it would be fun to have a kind of humorous example. So I took the Lone Ranger and Tonto. Mm-hmm. They're both out of work. They're riding around the desert. They're overweight. Their clothes are wrecked. Their script writer died. They don't know what they're doing. And they see the Buddha sitting under a tree by a mesa. And they go over and he jumps up and he takes such perfect care of their horses that the Lone Ranger says to Tonto, this guy must be the servant of a very rich man. Let's stick around here and we'll wait till he comes back. Maybe he'll give us a loan to get back to Hollywood. Who knows? Maybe he'll bank a movie. And the Buddha sees right through this and he plays along. And little by little, he leads them along until each one has his own kind of enlightenment experience. Tonto first, and he leaves, and then the Lone Ranger freaks out. And so basically, the Lone Ranger is just anybody, any kind of entitled white guy in this culture with, life's problems. And Tonto's another kind of guy. He's had different experiences. And these stories are interleavened in the chapters of the book to give people a kind of more humorous example of the way Buddhist practice works.
Excellent. It sounds like a fantastic book. And do you continue to teach these classes?
Yeah, I do. Although one of the things I'm thinking of, I teach 4 times a year at a voiceover school called Voice Tracks in Sausalito. Samantha Paris is a very good teacher. Everybody in her school gets work in games, in cartoons, in advertisements, and we work the same way and we share an agent. And I have been doing some classes and I've been thinking of going public with it. The problem is that you can only do about 12 people at a time, or people spend too much time sitting around. So it means, getting people to get 12 people together and to hire me to come out. But I do it and I love doing it. And I'm hoping this book might introduce more people to the idea and make them curious.
Absolutely. I think it's a brilliant opportunity to work with you, but also as a Zen Buddhist priest, you're bringing a whole other aspect. I think it's needed in Hollywood, in Los Angeles more than ever. They should have a studio and have the whole studio rented out weeks for you to teach this. But the book is available, Peter, December 7th, correct?
Yeah, it'll be on sale.
Okay.
Bookstores and Amazon and
yeah,
all over
bookstores and everywhere. Now, Peter, what does the word love mean to you?
I would say it means radical openness, radical acceptance. To the point that you merge with the object of your affection. And that's both the thrill and the horror of it. When you fall in love with somebody and you go, oh my God, we think the same about everything. Oh, you just want to be in the skin of that person. And then you do that for a while and you come smack up against the area where they're not you, where they're different, where they leave their stockings hanging over the sink, or, they don't do the same thing with the orange peels you do. But in terms of the larger world, I think it's radical acceptance. You realize that everything nameable comes from this primordial energy the Buddhists call emptiness. Here, not to go on too much, but here's an image. Imagine you're looking at a choppy ocean with millions of little wavelets rising and falling. Every one of those waves could be a human life. They could be a species. They could be a mountain range. They could be anything nameable in the world. And they all come out of the formlessness of the ocean, and they assume shape for a while as a peak, and then they settle back in the ocean. And when they're a little wavelet, we call that being alive. And when they go back to the ocean, we call that being dead. But the truth of it is, the little waves forget, and we forget, that we've never for one instant not been part of the ocean. If there's no oxygen, no sunlight, no microbes in the soil growing food, no pollinating insects, no birds controlling pests, if the planet Earth was closer to the sun, water would burn off. We wouldn't be here. If it was farther away, it would freeze. If people were not planting cotton, spinning cotton, sewing cotton, shipping cotton, we wouldn't have clothes to wear. So as much as we feel like we're a singular, isolated person, we've also never not been part of all of it. And that's a kind of fundamental double both and understanding That's really helpful. You'll stop being afraid of dying because there's nobody, you can't say who's living. It's just a feeling. And so to me, love is the acceptance that everything is coming from this ocean. Everything is being generated by the universe. And whether I like it or not with my small mind, it means something to the universe or it wouldn't be here.
And Peter, great answer. People always say, "Oh, I have to have a healthy ego," and I know in my work of working with people, many people who have egos that are out of check, they have to be brought back into enlightenment. How would you describe the ego? What is the ego?
That's a really great question. So just imagine our evolution. If we hadn't have been greedy, curious, angry, hungry, whatever it is, we probably wouldn't have survived 2.5 million years ago. So we still have the traces in ourselves of all of those impulses and thoughts and sensations which brought us here. The ego is just your sense of self. It's not a problem. If it was really a problem, it wouldn't have survived the crucible of evolution. But its job is just to help you, remind you to brush your teeth, wash your face, cross on the green, not on the red, make sure you're warm enough that the food's not poisoned, etc. The problem is that we turn it into a thing and we change it from being a guide to a guard. And then it changes from being a guard to a warden. And we give it this solidity. It's just the focus of our awareness as an individual unit. But unless we get respite sometime, release from it sometime, by meditating, by merging with big mind, it gets exhausting. And we're always trapped in a world of contradictions. And we're never free of contradictions. We're always just wrestling and tired or trying to fulfill some need or want, because the central delusion of the ego is that it's the most important thing in the universe. And so people begin to honor everything they think. They believe everything they think. And then a thought crosses their mind. They say, oh my God, that's my inner self. Of course, the vaccine is a fraud. It's like anything can be a problem if you take it too far.
Correct. I know you also have another book which is already published, and that is The Tongue of the Crow, which is the poetry that you have. I know you worked with someone, but it was all your idea. That is out. Yes. Show us that. Tongue of the Crow.
That's the book.
Okay.
So that's a funny story. I came out to California to be a poet and to work with a guy named Robert Duncan, a very brilliant guy. And he was so brilliant that I felt like an idiot. And I left graduate school to do the 60s. But I never stopped writing poems. And about 5 years ago, I turned 75. And I had this drawer full of poems. And I thought, oh my God, my poor kids are going to find these. They're not going to know what to do with them. They're not going to want to just burn them or throw them out. So I called some poet friends of mine, and they led me to a fellow who's a wonderful teacher. And we started working about 5 poems every 2 weeks, taking them apart, interrogating them, cutting the bullshit out of them. And over that time, we produced this book. And so this thin little book is the best of 50 years. And it's had a fantastic reception. The first printing's been sold out. And it's gotten me back to writing a lot of poems. And it's a place that I've always lived, but it's kind of like my secret life. When I first had to read a poem to a bunch of people, I was terrified because I had lived with all these poets in the 60s, Gary Snyder, Michael McClure, Philip Whalen, Lou Welch, Gregory Corso. They were all friends of mine. None of them knew that I wrote poems because I was so shy about it. So this is really, I'm 80 now, and this book is out, and here we are. I'm really pleased with it.
Excellent. Well, I think there's always the second chapter of your life is always, or the third chapter is always, you know, a charm. And I know you also have 40 fruit trees in your backyard or on your
Yeah.
place. What kind of trees are those?
So I make jam. That's my hobby.
Yes.
So I have a good orange tree. I made 50 half pints of marmalade. I have a tangerine tree I make marmalade from. I've got about 15 apple trees, 2 fig trees, 3 pear trees, 2 peach trees, fuyu persimmon. And I was going to try to sell this jam. I thought I've got this little farm and I've put in this irrigation system and all this stuff. But the state is such a pain in the butt, and they insist that I use 50% sugar, and I just don't want to do it. So I have pectins that I don't need any sugar if I don't want to, and so I just give them away as gifts. It's like, you know, I give a lot of the fruit away because I can't use it all, so it goes to food kitchens and gleaners come. And I love living with these trees. I brought them back. My land was inhabited by dope growers for about 10 years who let everything just go fallow. When I came back, I irrigated everything, and these trees just celebrated being alive again, and they just drowned me in fruit.
I love it. I love it, Peter. Well, Peter, your new book is coming out, The Lone Ranger and Tonto Meet Buddha. That is up on the screen. People can find it anywhere where all books are sold, Amazon. They can go to the Facebook, which your page is The Authentic Peter Coyote.
Yeah, there's some imposters out there.
They all want to be Peter Coyote.
I don't know, but they're using my name.
We need to charge them. And I thank you so much. I believe you are still going to create more poetry, more books, more authenticity. You're a ray of hope for people, and I believe you're the best kept secret in Northern California. We want to share. We want to share you with the world now.
Thank you so much, Gary. Thanks for these great questions, by the way.
It was such a pleasure, and I look forward to meeting you, Peter. And thank you for joining me on Ready, Set, Live.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm Gary Quinn. Join me for another episode of Ready, Set, Live. Until next time, be well.